I will attach a video that I made following this. This is a little preamble. The video is an explanation that I'm giving to some of the galleries that are looking at my work. I made a video to explain the background of these specific paintings, and I want to make a quick footnote. And yes, this for Barry. This is my Buchanan, my honorary Buchanan membership plaque on my head, Barry. The footnote I want to make before you see the video of my explanations of these paintings is in regard to, I said they come out of a process that began about 2004, 10, 12 years ago, where I started to paint in a way that I'd never done before. And I realized at that point there was a way that it struck me, this is part of my breakthrough, that it struck me it's not what it is that you're looking at, but how it's made. And the greatest impact that on the viewer to communicate is connected to when a person identifies with the process, with not just an image where you internalize something. Yes, a subject, a vase of flowers impacts you and you internalize that in a sort of abstract intellectual way. But when you connect with a work of art, and the greatest impact, I believe, is when a person realizes in themselves to be part of it in terms of making it. Now, it doesn't mean that you would be able to make it, but it somehow identifies within ourselves a kinship, almost, a kinship. My Buchanan, a kinship with the object, with the person that you're looking at. So it's how something is made has an enormous impact on the viewer when they're looking at it. This is something understood. So when you listen to my explanation, what I think I needed to preamble here is that there is, in my own breakthrough or realization, it's not so much the subject, which I like a good story, I've always said this, but it's also to find a way, a very personal way of expressing myself. And now, specifically these works on paper that are based on the Pacific Ocean, which is a magnificent body of water, the largest body of water on Earth. And it's, one would think that the violence and the power and the enormity of this is like so overwhelming to us. But I believe I chose the paper for a reason. And the paper is, from an art perspective, a very fragile material. It's not like canvas that lasts hundreds and hundreds and maybe even longer years, like maybe even 1,000 years if you do it correctly, like a Vermeer. Being 300 years old is pretty good looking still. Very few cracks. There's some, and Rembrandt as well, because they knew how to deal with their material on the surface that would make it last. Contrary, paper is very fragile and it has to be preserved properly, which is why you often see, or mostly see, paper behind glass. So the idea of making paintings of this robust subject, the ocean, the water, on paper is antithetical. It's an anomaly in itself. But the way I have worked with this material, I have managed to work with it, work within the fragile context of it, meaning the ocean is threatened, the fragility of this, and I have transitioned in a sense, in a kind of hopeful sense, to make it permanent again by mounting on canvas. Now that's somewhat psychological, and I just wanted to add this as a kind of footnote to maybe possibly give you a better understanding of where I'm coming from, why I choose the materials I chose, and in my own specific way of working, which is very unique and very individual. No one is working this way. I guarantee no one is working this way, because I have understood that we live in the age of fission. And the artist of the age must identify the age they're living in to have significance in a long term. So when you look at any artist now that doesn't identify the time that they're in, not project what it's going to be in 100 years or 50 or 10 years or tomorrow. It's like the day we're in, the moment Our moment-to-moment existence is expressed in the art that an artist needs to make. And where are they? Where are they? And you can, as a curator, I suggest to you, unless an artist has identified the time they're in, their work will be insignificant in the future. It's just a side note to people that are interested, and unfortunately quite often is that the general population picks this up maybe 50 years, 100 years, sometimes never. Usually, I don't know if most art that is of value has been discovered. I don't think it has, even in terms of history. Like a lot of artists that were totally significant and important have disappeared. Anyway, I don't hope to go with the dodo bird. Hopefully, before my time, before I leave, people will recognize what I'm talking about. So here's the video. This is a brief presentation of the paintings that I call my Pacific paintings, and I would like to give a little bit of a background, an understanding of where these paintings come from. And I will intersperse images besides the ones that you see behind me. These are basic size, the smaller sizes. They range from about 2 feet by 3 feet to as large as 9 feet by 12 feet in terms of scale, in terms of size. And I'm going to start by giving a bit of a background on where these paintings originate. And there are two parts to this. There is a psychological, emotional side to these paintings and a physical side to the paintings, a purely art side to the paintings. And they originate probably, I would say, about 12 years ago when I began a series of paintings based on playing cards, where I took images, I painted half of an image, took an imprint and recreated or turned the image around and placed it underneath to have what is known as a card painting. The top and the bottom part are clones of each other. They're not mirror images. And I used the process of taking an imprint and almost, I suppose, a model print idea in a large scale version. These cards were also quite large. They averaged around 8 feet, 7, 8 feet tall, up to about 16 feet tall, and it was quite a lugubrious, and I had to apply myself in a physical way to produce these paintings. I invented a medium that would work very well with what I was doing. So I'm showing you in the back superimposed images of these cards to give you a sense of where these paintings came from. It proceeded after the card paintings, where I developed the method of making a painting into using clear polytarp plastic to do the imprinting. And I realized that the image on the polytarp itself began to intrigue me. The finish, the texture, the smoothness, whereas the cards had been quite rough and textured, the polytarps were very smooth. They were almost glossy in surface, but there are no additives in terms of varnishes on top of the surface. They're very smooth, very glossy, an interesting effect from a purely art-making point of view, which leads me now to the series of paintings based on the Pacific Ocean. The emotional context behind this is I'm quite seriously concerned and convinced that the ocean is being destroyed with nuclear radiation, which is the backdrop, the emotional backdrop. And the reason I mention this, as in all great art produced in the past, people that have taught me, like Goya, for example, the disaster of war etchings and his brutal paintings, Saturn eating his children, and the ghoulish paintings he made. The times demand a way of expressing oneself. The times demand a way of presenting images to a population that identifies the age and identifies something of the age that we need to grapple with. And I think these paintings are rooted in this philosophy, the idea that art identifies the age. Artists are not ahead of their time. They identify the time that they're in. Like Goya, like Giotto, like Michelangelo, many artists, even people such as Otto Dix and George Grosz during the Nazi regime, revealing the brutality of the regime that they represented in their paintings. They were, of course, called degenerates, and they were ostracized by the society at the time, which leads me into these paintings. And these paintings reflect my emotional state about what it is, the age that we're in. And I believe that we're in the age of fission to the extent that matters to someone looking at these paintings. You can look at these and see them as beautiful paintings, which they are. They are primarily beautiful paintings, which is in a sense an irony. It's not like Goya reproducing his emotional context was his despair about the situation with the Peninsula War that he found himself in, and the brutality that how people practice their existence, their day-to-day existence. So now that is the emotional backdrop. The physical backdrop to these paintings is that they're very unusual. And in the 1980s, early 80s, after I finished my art school, I came across a very interesting painter called Pierre Alashinsky, who worked on paper. And not until 30 years or more later now have I returned to the idea of large-scale image making on paper. But I had to find a way to express this age I feel we're in. I say we are in the age of fission. And what kind of work is required to actually produce work of significance, something that I can serve you on a plate to chew on? What is it that makes these paintings unusual and different in the sense of all other work being produced? As we have throughout history, artists have produced work of significance based on their ability to produce an object that is so unusual and so inventive and original. I place a high degree of value on originality. Beauty is on the lower end of my scale, but nonetheless, if you see these paintings as beautiful, which I believe they are, it is of significance and importance to the viewer, and I don't deny that. So the idea of making these paintings is based on my desire through art history to make paintings that give people something, as I say, to chew on, something that reflects the age we're in. And the fact that they're produced on paper in a very special way, with my own way, no one else is painting in this form. And I'm not just talking about using sticks like Pollock dripping. No one had made a painting the way Pollock had used his tools, traditional tools up to a point, but he brought something of interest to us with his drip paintings, the way he made those paintings. And it's very similar that these images on paper, very fragile surface, are produced is absolutely integral to the way they look. So the way I make them actually cause them to look a certain way. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But what I'm doing is I'm using traditional materials in order to produce an object that is of the 21st century. So the look, the way they appear, the way they look, are directly related to how I make them. In other words, the subject is quite secondary to the perception the viewer has about how this might have been made, which is very important, which makes them quite unusual as far as I'm concerned, which excites me. And if it excites me, my conclusion is it will excite the viewer as well. And the way I've made these paintings is it's a drawn-out process of reworking a surface, a paper, a flimsy paper surface that buckles and bends in many different ways, and at the end of which it is completely smooth and the surface is pristine smooth, mounted on canvas. And I think there is a name for that. I think it's called mouflage or something like that, that identifies this process of mounting large pieces of paper on canvas to secure their permanence. So I hope this gives you an idea of where these paintings come from and give a little bit of a background as to how they're made as well.